All right, we'll go ahead and get going. Appreciate everybody joining us today, and thanks for your attention. I know you got lots of things on your plate. Everyone has concerns when it comes to cybercrime. Everybody knows what we read and hear about all the time about cybercrime. But what we want to talk about today is just how large this problem is globally. And so we want to give you some insight in cybercrime, some global stats around that, and then also just testing around what you're doing already from your business when it comes to security controls, but some of the other things that you can do. So there are things you can do about it. But what we want you to walk away from is an understanding of the problem of cybercrime is larger than you thought. Its magnitude is much larger than you thought. You're more at risk than you believe today, but there are things that you can do about it. So, for those of you who don't know AtNet, I'll give you a brief intro to us. We'll talk about cybercrime, its impact globally, especially on the economic front. We'll talk a little bit about the cyber criminal supply chain. This is something that is normally an eye-opening thing for people when we're talking about how these folks are designed. So we'll give you a little insight into the supply chain. We'll talk about the top threats affecting all businesses. So this is all sizes of businesses, how to protect yourself from cybercrime and in terms of driving down the risk for cybercrime. And then last but certainly not least, give you a chance to ask some questions at the end. And if you would, just in the way of housekeeping, if you would leave your microphones muted for the duration of the call, feel free to submit questions via chat. And at the end, when we get to Q&A, more than happy to have you unmute yourself and ask questions live if you want to do it that way. All right, so AtNet is a managed IT services company. We've been serving businesses within the Southeast since 99. We help businesses focus on how they can better manage the technology that they own and operate within their businesses, and then also help them when it comes to cybersecurity and driving down their risk for cyber attacks and cyber threats. Where we focus our efforts in the technology management space is really on the most expensive part of your business, your people, and really creating efficiency around workflow and around the ways that they use technology, really to help them own and operate their technology in a more efficient way and a more secure way. And as one of my colleagues likes to put it, I think he's trademarked it at this point, we help businesses put moats around their castles when it comes to security. So let's talk about cybercrime. Cybercrime has been growing at an alarming rate since 2020. We all know what happened in 2020, but with the distribution of workforce, the proliferation of cloud-based applications, migrations to platforms like 365 and Google Workspace, all those things sort of led to an increase in cybercrime. And globally, cybercrime costs are expected to exceed $10 trillion by the end of this year. So that's one staggering fact about it. The other one is how fast it's growing. So it's growing at an alarming rate of 15% year over year. So if you take a look at it and you compare it to global economies, at least on the large scale, if cybercrime were an economy, it would be the third largest economy in the world behind the US and China. But what's more alarming about it on the growth rate that it has is that it's growing 2x the fastest large economy in the world, which is India. India grew at just under 7% year over year at the end of last year. So it's growing twice that fast. So it's something that's affecting all businesses. In fact, we see businesses compromised as often as every 39 seconds. And it doesn't matter what size your business is. We'll give you a little bit more insight when we get into the supply chain and why that is. But it is an issue for businesses of all sizes. There's too much money at stake, and the problem is not going away. This is what the supply chain looks like, and this is more in the case of ransomware and how ransomware is deployed. So it's still a top threat for businesses. It's not the only threat, but it is still one of the threats. And if you kind of look at this and the way these guys are organized from left to right on the screen, You've got organizations that consider themselves initial access brokers, and what that means is these specialized organizations are simply looking for ways that they can target businesses and they can penetrate their security controls that they have in place or lack of security controls. They're simply just looking for people for whom they can gain access, and then they're selling that to the affiliates over here on through the data managers, the people that operate ransomware. And then you've got folks that specialize in the negotiation tactics, putting pressure on victim organizations. And then lastly, to accounting organizations that will help launder the money. So they're very well defined organizations within the supply chain that are highly specialized at their task. And one of the things that we've begun to see, because quite often we get asked, well, how is AI and things like that helping the bad guys do their jobs? What we've seen is sort of tools that will allow people to combine all of these into one tool. So one threat actor can carry out all of these things. So it's even more alarming. But the way that these organizations are set up right now, they're not unlike legitimate organizations around the world. They have sales teams, they have marketing teams, leadership teams, they've got spiffs, they've got president's club trips. I mean, all the things that we find in our businesses that help legitimate businesses succeed, that they have the same kinds of things. And so we've moved well beyond somebody who's got too much time on their hands and they've gotten a tool at their disposal, which is kind of where we were about 10 years ago. If you kind of think back to the antivirus days of people trying to deploy viruses and things like that, is that's what we were to people that are very well defined in what I've just mentioned structure wise, but they're also very well educated. They're state sponsored in a lot of cases. And one of the questions that we commonly get is how can these people not be caught? They're very good at masking their identity. And again, with governments being complicit in their activities, there's safe harbor against these folks in a lot of cases because they're sharing in some of the dollars. So because of that, it makes businesses, if you think about that initial access broker that I talked about, they don't care the size of the organization. They don't care the industry that you're in. They don't care the type of data that you have either. So, I mean, they're just looking for people who are vulnerable. So let's talk about the top threats. And this is not just as we see them, but we subscribe to threat reports annually, which takes attacks from the previous year. It categorizes them across industry and type and organizes them into the top threats. So these are taken from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. You can go out to Verizon's site. You can download this if you want to peruse it. But we've summarized the top three threats from there, and they change year after year. Some of them stay the same, unfortunately, but as they pivot and we need to adapt for the controls, then we adapt our controls around these threats. Business email compromise is one of the top ones, and these are in no particular order. These are just the top threats, but probably no surprise to most of you. Some of you have been through this before on the email compromise side. You had something suspicious going within an email. That's simply what we're talking about, somebody who gains unauthorized access to an email. But commonly what we see is it pivoting to things like invoice fraud. I mean, regardless of what we reinforce time after time, there's still a lot of sensitive content located within email. So if somebody can get access to email, there's a few things that they can do. They can locate sensitive information. They can locate users that you regularly correspond with, so people within your supply chain. They can also use AI tools to imitate your voicing and normal correspondence that you have with them, making the other organizations more prone to phishing-based attacks. But we commonly see these evolve into invoice-type fraud. So when they get access to invoices from your suppliers or from you to your clients, they mimic those invoices. In a lot of cases, they can change remit tos, and we see that commonly. I mean, just a few weeks ago, we had somebody call us, not somebody that we even do business with. They had just gotten, in this case, they had gotten a illegitimate wire that got sent out of their bank. The first was for $150,000, followed by one for $50,000. The bank's response was it was from a trusted email, and that's why they sent it out. So that's alarming in 2025, but it just goes to show. And when we talk about the controls, there's a lot of process-oriented things that need to be taken into consideration. The second one is we still see a lot of ransomware-based attacks. But we've seen them pivot to data extortion. So while both of those are types of extortion attacks, ransomware implies that there's some sort of encryption. So the encryption of data wherever it is, whether it's a cloud-based system or something that you run on servers on site, we see some encryption followed by a ransom demand and a decryption key if you get that far and you don't have good backups. But we've seen that pivot to something just simply known as data extortion, where people are extracting data or exfiltrating data from those systems, threaten to expose it on the web or the dark web, and then demand money that way. But we see those based attacks come in as phishing in a lot of cases. So again, they're getting very good at designing phishing based email attacks with AI tools. That are making them more and more difficult to spot. You can still look for the keys that we have in the past, but they're getting more and more difficult because they're easier for them to again improve the quality of voicing and those grammatical mistakes that we commonly used to look at. A lot of those have been eliminated. But social engineering is something that we've seen be on the rise in the last 12 months. Somebody calling in and posing as a supplier of yours. So think cloud-based applications that you use in your environment, or even IT support teams. So they'll inundate you with spam or phishing emails and then call in to help at the end. So posing as somebody else. But we've seen a number of those that are on the rise. Credential theft is something that continues to be a top threat. And there's a couple of different reasons for it. One, the tools make it a lot easier for them to launch password attacks against accounts. But the proliferation of accounts that we all have under our management has increased as well. I mean, on average, we have about 100 accounts that we have for online services that we either subscribe to or have signed up for personally and professionally. And as many as half of those have reused credentials. And so those are the things that make it even more vulnerable for individual users on the personal side and the professional side. So if one of those accounts gets compromised, it's easy for them to pivot when they have a list of other services and things like that. They can launch attacks against those common services. But we see those from the phishing side where they're trying to get you to enter credentials. And then we've seen a number of those rise on the social engineering side. So if you're a Salesforce type user and somebody posing as Salesforce, for example, calls in looking for credentials, we've seen a number of those be on the rise. I'm just singling out Salesforce just for an example, but there are a number of those SaaS-based or cloud-based applications. So let's talk about some good news. How can you protect your business? Many of you are probably doing some of these controls. Some of you may be doing all of these controls, and that's great. But let's talk about the controls that are necessary in order to protect your business and drive down risk. You can't get 100% of the risk from cyber threats out of your business, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But you can definitely get a significant portion of it driven down just by simply implementing these controls. Multi-factor authentication. The key here, though, is while most of you are probably already doing this, it's on everything. So on all of the applications that you employ. So think to exceptions that you have where I have it on 9 out of 10. Well, it needs to be on 10 out of 10. But the other exception comes in where there can't be exceptions based on personnel. One of the things that we commonly see is leadership wanting to be excluded from some of the security within an organization. Leadership typically has the most access and they're the greatest targets. And so this really needs to be across the organization at large for all applications and users. Managing system-wide vulnerabilities is important. So while most of you know Windows patches and things like that, you have other software within your environment and you have other hardware that also needs to be patched routinely. They're all subject to vulnerabilities. And we saw this in 2024 from 2023's threat report that system-wide vulnerability exploitation was up 100%. And so we know that these bad actors are taking advantage of that. And so having an ongoing management process for how you identify the vulnerabilities within your environment, which comes first from knowing everything that's managed within your environment, and then you can manage those vulnerabilities and take action. That's really where the process side of it comes in. email and identity hardening. So most are using things like cloud-based email security. We've been using those things for 15 years, anti-spam, anti-malware, those type things. But things that more monitor and take action based on the identity or the behavior of the accounts within 365 or Google, those things are particularly at risk if people can get in again with email based on my comment earlier with the sensitivity of email and the other things that they can identify within that. It makes email, and then in the 365 tenant, most of you are probably using OneDrive, SharePoint, things like that. You have a lot of sensitive data within that. So it's important to make sure we're safeguarding not just the email, but the overall tenant itself. Tested backups with offline immutable backup copies. I made sure that I emphasized the tested part of this. It's most everybody that we meet with has backups of some description, but making sure those things are tested, they're reliable, they can be restored. It's important to also know how long that process would take to restore in the event you need to restore from a backup. That's an important part of safeguarding your data. But best practice is to have an offline immutable backup copy. So simply just something that can't be overwritten or changed by a bad actor. That's one of the first things that they look to do when they get into an environment is look for backups, look to delete backups or change those backups in some way and access those. So having something that's immutable would protect you against that. 24/7 threat detection with an incident response plan. So let's talk about the first part of that first, which is the 24/7 threat detection. Everybody that we talk to has some form of endpoint protection, but it's important to rise above and beyond that to things that are looking for anomalous behavior, things that don't quite look right, so that action can be taken on that. Your traditional EDR type products, which is the upgraded version of your antivirus, 60% effective against cyber threats. So it's important to have something that can detect and take response or action on those things when they do bypass detection. These bad actors are notorious for running the common things that everybody uses in a lab, and so they write things that can evade detection. But having an incident response plan as well, it's not an if something happens within your organization, but a when. So understanding how you're going to mobilize the resources that you have, partnerships within your ecosystem to help you through those type things, so that you can navigate the challenge of, again, early detection is key. So you can minimize the impact to the organization. And that incident response plan is a key in there. And no matter what we do from a tools, people, or process standpoint, our people are our weakest link when it comes to security. And so having a rigid, continuous training program for all of your users is very, very important so that your users are in the know on what we're seeing across the landscape of security, what these bad actors are doing, the tactics that they're employing, and then most importantly, how they can identify those things, the things that they need to safeguard within their protection is key for all users. And then carrying cyber liability insurance. Most of the people that we talk to now, save for a few that we do run into, don't have cyber liability insurance, but having something that is a backstop for all these things, again, not if something happens, but when something happens, is an important part of your overall risk management as well. And the key there is just to make sure that you've got not only that you have cyber liability insurance, but that you review it annually, not just simply renew it, so that you can make sure that you've got adequate coverage. The last thing you want to do is have to employ that policy and find out that you've got sublimits on ransomware or one of these other tactics, and it leaves you exposed. So it's important to get with someone who understands cyber and specializes in that, not just simply a rider on the insurance that you carry today. So key takeaways. There's a lot of money at stake for cyber criminals. As I mentioned, global cybercrime costs exceeding $10 trillion this year. We commonly get asked, what does it generally cost for the average organization? If you go out on the internet and you look for different stats, you'll be directed to $3 to $4 million in a lot of cases. I think IBM has a stat of 4.3 million. It's a little high, I would say, for small and medium businesses, but it's not uncommon for them to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars when you consider lost productivity and the people that you have to bring in and potentially lost data and things like that. They're very, very expensive. but it's not going away because of all the money that's at stake for these cyber criminals. That's their number one motivation is money. Every business is a target. So that was one of the things that I wanted to make sure you walked away from this, because we still hear commonly, my business is too small and I'm a little under the radar. There's no such thing as under the radar. Your business is on the map and you're making money, and that's why you're a target. It's not an if, but when you face a cyber event, and you can reduce your risk. That's the takeaway that I want everybody to walk away from this. There are things that you can do, because we get asked sometimes when we start talking about this, is this a hopeless cause? It's not. There are things that you can do to drive down your risk significantly to these things. But also engage an expert to help. This is not something that you should go along in trying to navigate this journey. These things will change. As I mentioned, we keep track of threat reports and controls that we need to employ and have in place for our clients. So it'll change along the way. And just as you are all experts within your particular industry, dealing with people that deal with this kind of stuff all the time is really key. And you can protect yourself. One of the questions that we get from people too is, this sounds really expensive. It's not as expensive as a cyber event, and it's not as expensive as you think it is to reduce your risk. But it is a people, process, and technology sort of strategy. Technology represents about 25% of what you need for a good strategy. And with that, I will open it up to questions. So any questions? Feel free to ask those, or if we've got some from chat, Austin, if you want to.
Yeah, we did have a couple, but Mike Snively, if you would unmute yourself, you can ask your questions.
So you talked a little bit, Joel, about the cost of the moats, if you will, that it's not as much as the cost of an incident.
Yeah.
But the second question I had is the 7 protections that you mentioned. Talk a little bit about where the genesis of those 7 came from. Was it just AtNet's experience, or did you get them from outside resources? A little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, so the controls that we went over, from multi-factor all the way down to the cyber insurance. I mean, they're taken from conferences that we go to. They're taken from security frameworks that we use within protections that we employ. So there's a couple of frameworks that we largely draw controls from. We draw controls from the CIS framework for people who are in government regulated industries. So the CIS controls, if you employ, and they have them broken down into 3 groups, it's probably a little bit too much for the purpose of this call, but they break them down into 3 groups, and mathematically you can drive down your risk as much as 95% of the top threats that exist out there. The NIST framework is equally as good, and a lot of it mimics what are in the CIS controls. They're a little bit more in depth when it comes to policy creation and things like that. So regulated industries are better subscribing to some of those type things. But yeah, we take it from that, and then our years of experience as well, the things that we see. But again, from conferences and things like that, how can we best insulate our clients from the attacks that are known and current is what we employ. So those things do have to adapt. A good question, Mike.
That's what I had. Thanks.
Any other questions, Austin?
Yeah, Joel, we got another one that just popped up, and I'll try and make sure that I'm phrasing this correctly.
Okay.
And Greg, if I'm not, you can comment again. But basically, if you could comment on the current state of the art, or what is the current state of the art 24/7 threat protection and monitoring?
So it's not a particular product necessarily. It's just something that, so I don't know how many of you have read about things called living off the land attacks. That's one of the things that we commonly see. And quite simply what it is using authorized software within your environment for threat actors to gain access and look like normal behavior on a workstation or operating system. And so it's a type of technology that understands through machine learning and AI what normal behavior of a particular user on a system looks like. So when there are things that are done above and beyond that normal user behavior, it sets off an alarm that can then be investigated and action can be taken after the fact. And your traditional endpoint security products, they do some of that. And even in the EDR space, they'll claim to do some of that, but they do fall short because of the detections that are written to get around or bypass their detection. So something that's specifically looking for things that don't look quite right, again, so you can have that detection, so you can take action after the fact. Because these guys are really good. As I mentioned, they're very well educated, very well funded. And so they're very, very good at masking their identity on systems. And so there's a variety of products out there, but it's sort of, again, the product, it's the people that are monitoring those systems, and it's the process of taking action after the fact that's sort of the combination. I hope I answered that okay. If I didn't, just let me know if I can clarify any other points. Good question. Anything else, Austin?
Yeah, I've got a couple more here. Can you speak to maybe the most common mistakes that you see businesses make that leave them vulnerable to cybercrime?
I think then, well, there's a couple, but I'd say the number one mistake is not believing that they're a target is still what we're dealing with. I mean, I made the comment that we do hear from people, but we hear it a lot more commonly than we should in 2025 that I'm too small or I don't have important data. Your data is important to you, and that's your data is important to you, and you have money, and that's what they focus in on. If they can change your data or use your data to pivot and attack someone else, they're targeting those type things. So it starts with just understanding, again, not from a scare tactic or anything like that, but just let's understand the reality of everyone being a target. Okay, from there, once we understand that reality, what steps do we need to take? And where we are right now, I mean, I think the last stat that I read on Microsoft 365, for example, just taking the first one of MFA across Microsoft's tenant ecosystem, 37% of organizations are protected by MFA right now. So, I mean, if we could get that to 100%, we could drive down a lot of this noise. And that's just with one control. So it's not an all at once kind of approach to it. It's a phased based approach. I mean, these things, while they don't cost as much as you think, there's still some investments required along the way. And so what we try to do for the clients that we work with is really help that be a phased approach. Let's make sure we're doing, some basic things and then we're layering on protections as it makes sense. Some of the things that need to be done are changes to configurations and things like that. I mean, just simply audits that need to take place on an ongoing basis. So I didn't get into some of the process, but yeah, I mean, those are kind of the mistakes, but it just stems from not understanding the reality of the scope, which is our fault. It's not anybody else's fault. We've not done a good enough job communicating that to the business community. So that's still where we've got a challenge to make sure we're educating people in the right way. And again, that's what we're trying to do today, letting people know the reality of it, but the things that they need to be doing. I hope that answers that question, Austin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions?
Well, you were kind of speaking about how everybody's a target. Do you tailor solutions to different industries and business sizes?
They're not particularly, but with one exception. So all businesses, I mean, those controls that we went over apply to all businesses just because those vulnerabilities that I went over, those top threats, it used to be that larger businesses did have different threats from small businesses, but there's so much parity in the technology that most of us own and operate now, from an enterprise account to a small to medium business. They're running similar technology, so the threats are the same. And in other words, the controls really need to be the same. The only exception to that are people that are in regulated industries. So people that, are subject to SEC or CMMC or HIPAA, things like that. There are some additional controls that need to be considered to be compliant with those regulations. So a lot of those are policy and training, and some of them are additional security controls as well. But that's the exception. Otherwise, everybody else really is subject to the same controls because they're subject to the same threats. Really good question.
That's all I've got.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Feel free to unmute yourself, ask a question. Otherwise, we will let you get back to your day. All right. Well, good deal. Well, I appreciate everybody being here for this. I hope that this was beneficial for you and you're able to take away some things that maybe you hadn't heard before. And then you can take and check it against some of the things that you're doing. I mean, most of you are probably doing a lot of these controls. It's not, you don't have to have 100% compliance to all those controls right now, but just be taking some steps to improve and then again, engage an expert to kind of help you as you go along. But certainly appreciate everybody's attendance and look forward to seeing you on a future webinar.